For most people, high school rushes by in a complete blur. And later in life, those 4 years are reduced to a handful of memories. And those memories get blurrier and blurrier the older we get. But not for me. Not one memory. The summer between my junior and senior year in high school was one of the best, right up until the end. 3 weeks before the beginning of the year, the varsity football team left for a week-long training camp. It was pretty vigorous, with 2 and 3 a day practices throughout. But generally, it was a good experience. Bonding with new friends, sharing downtime with old ones, and grinding through the strain with teammates. By Wednesday, I was exhausted. Most of the guys were still up, talking loudly and boisterously about girls, beer and cars. 3 topics seniors in high school always pretend to know far more about than they actually do. Normally, I'd have been right there with them, laughing and yelling far louder than any of us should. Tonight, though, I was just too damn tired. I walked out of the showers and past the break room, the ruckus still ringing out down the hall. I went straight to the bunks. There was one large bunk room for the 50 or so players on the team. The room was packed with rows of bunks, all a bit closer than any of us would have liked. When I got to my bed, I dropped my towel and put on a pair of comfortable gym shorts, leaving my towel on the floor. I collapsed, face down on my bunk. Between the hard labours of the day and the fresh, warm feeling from just stepping out of the shower, I couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds to fall asleep. When I awoke, the lights had been turned out and gentle snoring could be heard from all around. Anyone who's ever slept in a large group of people knows the setting. It's oddly comforting, like nothing could go wrong while you're all together. But I was quickly going to find out that it could. I think it was about 2 a.m. I'm not sure. I just wanted to get back to sleep before morning practice. When I first saw something move, I assumed it was just the light playing tricks on me. You know, like when a coat hanger looks like a hooded figure standing in a corner. It wasn't until I tried to move my head to get a better look that I realised I couldn't. I tried to roll over, tried to sit up, wiggle my toes or fingers, but I couldn't. I was paralysed. That's when I saw it again, like a shimmer. But instead of light, it was darkness. Almost like small wisps of entirely opaque black smoke. And then, in the darkness, something materialized out of it. It looked human, but not quite. It consisted of the same black material and stood about 5 or 6 feet tall. It was far too thin, with elongated bony limbs and knobby joints, and there was no face on it. As I stared at this thing, slowly moving through the room, I saw another, moving just behind it. Then another, and another. The room was full of them. I watched them, shuffling around the room. Slowly, but as if each had somewhere specific to be. One by one, each of these shapes found their destination and stood over a bunk. As they stood, they would lean in, pressing their face right up against that of the bunk's occupant. I couldn't see what they were doing or what was happening, but it was so unnerving. My body screamed to move, run, flee, escape. And I couldn't do any of those things. And that's when I saw mine. The figure slowly walked up to the side of my bunk and paused before slowly starting to lower its face towards me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could do is stare helplessly back. Right before the hideous thing reached my face, it stopped. It was frozen for a second. My mind screamed in complete animalistic fear, stuck in fight or flight, unable to do either. Without any warning, the creature recoiled in horror, bringing its hands, if you could call them that, up to its face as it stepped back. I looked around the room. All of the things had turned and were looking at me. They all turned as one and began making their way towards me, slowly, in the same manner as before. They closed around me from every direction, each one inching closer and closer and closer. When I could see scarcely anything other than their horrible faces, I heard them speak, like a whisper, but overpoweringly loud.
This is why you can see us.
Then they closed in, and all I could see was absolute blackness. I jolted awake, a cold sweat covering every inch of my body. Coach had flipped on the lights and was yelling at groggy players to get their gear on and get outside. I got up and pulled my equipment on. I was the first on the field, since I didn't have any trouble waking up. Throughout the practice, I managed to push it out of my mind as just a nightmare. And the rest of the week went by in a blur. Having chalked the unnerving experience up to nothing more than a scary dream, I soon regained focus and started working my ass off. That kind of hard work makes the days go slow, but the week go fast. Before I knew it, we were back on the bus, headed home. I sat near the front of the bus with a couple of friends. Having put the grueling week behind us, we were thoroughly looking forward to getting back to our last couple weeks of summer. And then, on to our senior year. We felt on top of the world, talking about anything and everything. To be honest, when I really think about it, I can't remember anything we actually talked about. really. The only thing I remember is looking up out the front of the bus and wondering why the truck in front of us had turned around and was facing us. That was the last thing I remember. I woke up 6 days later in a hospital bed. The bus had been struck by an oncoming semi. The driver had fallen asleep. I'd lost the use of both of my legs. My football days were over. But it was my last season anyways. Feels wrong to complain since I was the only one who survived the wreck. It changed my life. My senior year came and went. I didn't take much joy in it with all my friends gone. When I graduated and wheeled across the stage, the ceremony paused for a moment of silence for everyone that was killed. Out of those 54 people, I was the only one there that day. I went on to graduate from a state college. Nothing too special. Met an amazing girl while I was there and we married a few years later. We had 2 kids, a girl and a boy, and have given them an amazing life, I like to think. I settled into a decent job too. It wasn't great, but it allowed me to support my wonderful family and give them enough for them to be happy. It took me a couple of years, but eventually I regained the use of my legs, albeit pretty limited. I'll never run again, but all things considered, I think I've lived a pretty normal, happy life. I never thought about that dream much more. I later learned through some random conversation what sleep paralysis is. Having something to describe what happened to me so perfectly pushed away any doubt from my mind that it was ever anything more than an ill-timed nightmare. That was close to 20 years ago now. This weekend I've taken my family out to a one-room cabin for a vacation. It was supposed to be relaxing, but I'm sitting at the table with an old but familiar cold sweat, and I'm staring at my family with a creeping fear. It had been 20 years, but last night I saw them again. They stood over each member of my wonderful family, and then they turned as one and stared deeply into me. Their faces split across by a white, toothy smile that stretched the whole width of their faces. This time, none of them came to me. This time, they already knew. And this time, they didn't speak to me. And then they were gone. Sometimes, silence is worse.